Welcome, everyone, to the June 28th, 2023 Audit Committee meeting. I am Liz Guttridge. I'm the Vice Chair, and Dan, our Chair, is out today, so I'm going to be leading the meeting. This is my first time leading the meeting, so feel free to interrupt me or make a funny face if I'm doing something wrong. So I thought we could just go around and do some quick introductions. We've got a lot of our financial staff here today. And I guess maybe we can just start on this side. And for the committee members, maybe just say like 2 sentences, like how long you've been on the committee, you know, maybe where you work or what your district affiliation is, stuff like that. We can just be very brief, but so that everyone's has a chance to be introduced. You want to start, Emma?
I'm Emma Williams, the Internal Audit Supervisor.
And I am Isaac Karn. I am an Internal Audit Staff member.
My name is Tim Heldman. I'm an Audit Committee member, past chairman. I'm a CPA and a 40-person accounting firm, a partner.
I'm Jim Crossett. I'm an audit committee member and Walnut Hills High School alumni and also CFO of Mesa Industries.
Clarice Warner, committee since 2018. I am a healthcare compliance consultant and CPS alumni and as well as my children. Hey.
My name is David Foote. I've been on this audit committee for about 12 years. I'm a senior internal audit manager at Bon Secours Mercy Health. I have grandkids in Cincinnati Public Schools. So.
I'm Liz Guttridge. I am a CPA and also a Walnut Hills graduate, and I'm a parent of 2 kids at Kilgore.
I'm Lauren Roberts, and I'm the Chief Audit Executive with the Internal Audit Department.
I'm Eve Bolton, board member.
Brandon Craig, board member.
Dr. Kareem Moffitt, board member. Jennifer Wagner, Chief Financial Officer.
Michael Gustin, Assistant Treasurer.
Adam Gepner, Director of Business Technology.
Kevin Ashley, Director of Financial Reporting and Transparency.
Jeremy Donahue, Chief Information Officer.
All right, thanks everybody. So this is our last meeting of the fiscal year, which will be ending this week. So I think the majority of the meeting this time is going to be looking back a little bit on where we've been this past year, but mostly looking forward to plans for the upcoming fiscal year. I think we have a lot of exciting things to discuss, and Lauren's and her team have put a lot of work into coming up with a good solid plan for the coming year. So with that, I will turn it over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So in your packets today, we've segmented the documents, as there are quite a few today, into 3 different packets bound by paper clips. So if you would pull out the first set of documents that start with a memo that are labeled project summary. We'll first cover the 3 outstanding projects that were completed relating to the fiscal 2023 internal audit plan. And then, as Vice Chair Guttridge said, we will move over to talking about the fiscal 2024 internal audit plan. So I will keep the updates over the fiscal 23 projects rather brief. I think the memos do a nice job summarizing the takeaways, but if you do have questions, I'm happy to expand. So the first project in your packet there is our payroll follow-up. So you may recall the prior fiscal year, we did an audit of payroll, and through that audit found significant levels of overtime. So as part of our due diligence this year, we decided to reperform those aspects of testing focused on overtime to see if those recommendations have been addressed and if overtime is trending down compared to last year. So the major takeaways from this project is The first question, are we trending down? Yes. Things are improving over last year. Aside from the minor, I shouldn't call it minor for those who are involved, I'm sure they wouldn't say, the flooding and pipe burst over at Rothenburg where we saw an increase. But aside from that instance, we do see a trend in the right direction. A lot of that is attributed to the facilities department at implementing a process now in which they have pre-approval for the majority of overtime worked, as well as a more robust process for facilities rentals. So while all of that is great news, I think the management still has some work to do in terms of designing and implementing a district-wide overtime approach. So Treasurer Wagner and our team have talked a bit about what that might look like and how those next steps could be designed. But of course, it takes a lot of partnership with many members throughout the district to ensure the compliance in that area. So good progress. I think this was an important touch point for us to make sure, since this was such an important area. But that concludes the update on payroll. And I pause there. Any questions on that project? Wonderful. All right, our next project. So we're just rolling right through these. We did memos. I don't think anyone's too upset probably not having a 20+ page audit report. So our next one is over continuous auditing. To refer back, this was an assurance, like a true audit project. Isaac Karn did a great job leading this work and designing a system that we can use year over year. So you'll see another iteration of this project in our upcoming plan. The takeaway and the key notion of this project were to touch base on 2 prior audits. Accounts payable, so specifically the tests that related to employee reimbursements, think mileage, meals, things of that nature, as well as procurement cards. So that's more of your district expenses that are charged onto that P card. So the key takeaways from these 2 projects are that things are looking well controlled. We don't see anything aside from minor items of note and improvement, where we still see some then and nows. We still see, instances of people submitting things perhaps they shouldn't have, but the majority of times those things are caught and corrected. The new analysis that was done through this project, though, was an entire population data analysis over employee reimbursements. So what Isaac did is he basically concatenated data to say, are there duplicates of employee ID and dollar amount that would flag out as a possible duplicate payment? So you'll see, I think this is really important to note, that on page 3, that at the top of that chart at the top shows the number of transactions. So we're talking almost 3,300 transactions over 3 fiscal years. There were 34 that were likely duplicates. So, percentage-wise, very, very small. But what we did note is 24 of those 34, however, were related to mileage. So we're assuming that people are submitting and then resubmitting, and there really isn't a robust control to prevent that. So we've talked with the Treasurer's Office team about possibly creating a flag in the financial system that could be used not only for employee reimbursements, but potentially other vendors as well, to say, hey, we've paid that specific vendor that amount before, are you sure? And so I think that's a control that could serve us here as we do look. I mean, you're looking at 4,000, we're rather certain, potentially another 4,500 once the Treasurer's Office investigates. But in the scheme of the $1.2 million, that's pretty darn good. So minor takeaways, but I think the real value is that we now have a developed system where we can test 10 samples on a quarterly basis in these areas as well as others, and give that real-time feedback back to management so they can make adjustments if needed or know things are going well. So that concludes the update on our continuous auditing. Any questions there? Yeah.
That was the population.
So if you pull a sample and based on the sample, you extrapolate 34 duplicates, is that what you did?
So I did a data analysis of the whole population, and then in the first sentence under it, we pulled out 81 possible based on the analysis of putting together the employee ID and the dollar amount. And then from those 81 possibilities, we dove into them to kind of get a better understanding of what the payments were. And then those 81 are reflected in the table in the middle.
So you had a program that pulled these 81 out.
Yeah, I kind of developed it in Excel.
What was the primary criteria for pulling out these 81?
The employee ID, so all of the employees have their own ID, as well as dollar amount.
The bigger dollar amounts?
We did all dollar amounts, and if there were two or more of the same ID with the same dollar amount, we went in and checked, see, was it just a reoccurring payment that was the same amount, or did they possibly get reimbursed for the same thing?
Okay.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Any other questions? Great. So the final update is around contracts management. This is a concept and a topic that's been heavily discussed in Finance Committee, and I know we've mentioned over the last year or so, we've been working to support that initiative. And for those who aren't familiar, I will, of course, refer to our treasurer if I misspeak here, but the idea at a macro level is that the district is working to fine-tune contracts to ensure we're only pursuing and keeping contracts that provide the most value to the district. And so the treasurer's office has started a position that's now the contracts analyst, who is working to develop a process for how do we create KPIs, key performance indicators, on the front end when people are entering their contracts, measure that progress over the life of the contract, and then at the end of this cycle, determine if those measures were met or, you know, if they weren't in some cases. And so this was a great opportunity, and we were thankful to be involved in the front end to say, here are some considerations you might want to build in as you're developing this process. So when you get all of this data, X amount of time from now, you can utilize it in a full population and it's manageable and you really got the information you intended to receive when you set out on this project. So Emma did a great job working with the contracts analyst, Cody Hutchins, and they came up with a really clear set of goals and next steps to ensure the success of this project as it moves forward. So as we look into this upcoming year, we didn't include this as a formal plan. However, we've expressed to Treasurer Wagner and Cody Hutchins that our doors open and call on us anytime, because he's a one person team at the moment, and you know, we're happy to provide guidance and insight beyond, you know, Jen and her team as well. So great project, and I look forward to see what comes from that position. So that concludes our fiscal 2023 plan. Any questions? Yes.
I'm sorry. What are other districts doing with regard to the return on investment for contracts?
That's a great question. I may defer. Jen, do you feel comfortable answering that?
The answer is I don't know. I know that, and when I go to the Council of Great City Schools conferences, everybody struggles with the definition of what a return on investment is in education, and they're all trying to figure out how to measure that numerically. I don't know that I don't know that I know of anybody that's going to the depth that we're doing yet. But I'll certainly, at the next opportunity, reach out. I know my colleagues in the Ohio aren't doing it. At least the urban ones aren't.
I'm just wondering from an audit perspective,
yeah,
if we are creating it, but are we using that as a basis to measure it against what other people are doing for effectiveness or with regard to our contracts? That's all.
Yeah, no, that's a great thing to continue to think through, and I'll continue to think through that with Jen as well as with other Council of Great City Schools auditors to say, how do we combine efforts as this progresses? So I'm glad you mentioned that.
I have a question. Do we have a tickler file when these contracts automatically renew? I mean, because a lot of contracts, you don't notify them like 30 days in advance, they automatically renew. And it would seem to me that, I guess this Cody Hutchins should maintain a calendar of some kind.
We do. The answer is yes. We have a tickler file.
Okay.
And it starts, and they're reviewed, at least the big dollar ones are reviewed with Finance Committee. But we go through we went through, we created an extract in November. Superintendent and I went through 884 contracts. We eliminated 111 based on results, or investment opportunities. And then we're reviewing the second half of the year now. There's another 360 some that we have to review.
So the, based on results, that's where this KPI concept comes in. In other words, each contract you're evaluating it for its effectiveness, and you probably have to have a specific key performance indicator for each contract.
Right. So this really started several years ago when the student wellness money came out from the governor, because suddenly I started getting inundated with vendors who wanted to do student wellness. You know, and everybody said, we're going to increase discipline or increase attendance, decrease discipline, and, you know, raise the sun and then stars in the moon. But nobody ever went back and checked to see if attendance went up or discipline went up or down. And so the concept in my mind started then. And so that we needed to make sure these people were being effective. And when I started asking questions, the answers I was getting was, well, the school really likes them. And I'm like, well, like isn't a key performance indicator. So we've taken a couple of years to educate people, and we're still struggling because it's not like calculating a return on for profit. And so it's getting better. Cody's done a tremendous job. The superintendent has been a great partner in this. And we've gotten great support from the finance committee to make it happen. So now we're going to try to expand it to more programmatic level items. So we started with vendor contracts, low hanging fruit, and then we're going to start, they went through school program audits this year. And so we're going to start reevaluating on the effectiveness, using those concepts to the effectiveness of some of the programs or curriculum that we're using.
Yeah, thanks. And I remember some months ago when I think at least one member of the audit committee was concerned that after all those efforts, we were only able to get rid of a certain number of the contracts. But at least what we got rid of, if you will, was it ended up being about $2 million.
2.8 million.
Yeah, 2.8 million. But again, to your point, last night or Monday night, we approved how many hundreds of contracts with some degree of assurance that somehow the new process was sort of in place or deeply in place. But again, this goes on and on.
So some learnings from this whole process, right? So one of the learnings we found was because we are a decentralized financial management system, we had schools that were individually contracting with the same vendor. So we would have one vendor with 8 different contracts or 12 different contracts. And so we're trying to consolidate those to get a better economies of scale, and to leverage work, right? Sometimes we were contracting with different vendors to do the same thing in different departments. And so now we thought here's an opportunity to make things better. So after we did the review and did the elimination to determine which ones we're going to continue to invest in, but we inserted Cody into the workflow approval process in our procurement system to prevent anybody from contracting with one we made a decision not to contract with, right? Just this is a simple check and balance. Then any new contract, in order for me to submit it to the board for approval, has to have a key performance indicator attached to it. They have to tell me what success looks like before I'll put it on the agenda for board approval. And then we'll use that measure to determine whether we're going to continue to partner with that vendor or not. So, you know, it's not a perfect process yet, but it's a good start.
What's the threshold for that? Dollar-wise, is it over $1,000 or?
Every penny.
Every penny.
Every penny. We started with the big dollars. Oh, sorry, Rob. I was getting ready to get the evil eye. We started with contracts over $200,000 and more because, you know, that was the low-hanging fruit. But there's just a lot out there. And so it was a very challenging process to go through. But, you know, and you'll hear later about our financial status and how we need to preserve every penny we can. So.
Can I ask one quick question? So what is the plan for when you are evaluating the KPI at the end or towards the end of the contract? Is that going to be done kind of at the school level or like at the user level?
So the process that's being designed is that the user, the manager, the person like the principal or the budget manager goes through and evaluates whether they made that KPI or not. And then we're designing reports to pull. Sometimes the data doesn't come in until September, so we don't know right away. It's not every cycle is going to be the same, so we're trying to feel our way through that. Good question, though.
Thanks for the information. Just a couple things on the first two items regarding the mileage and what have you. Do we see any impact on the budget that we're still working on at this time for 24? I mean, is it be less dollars in those areas, small as they may be? I mean, how does this all begin to impact what we're doing regarding not just the accountability of who's responsible, but what impact is it having regarding our expenses and what have you?
So we tried to go back to zero-based budgeting this year for non-personnel items, right? And so the reviews that we're going through now is going back as they're asking for their budgets. Superintendent and I are partnering. I'm pulling up the actual spend of the current year versus their budget. And so, for example, for overtime, if you budgeted $100,000 this year, but you spent 10, I'm going to give you $100,000 next year. So we're actually going to that level of detail in these meetings. So it's having an impact. I don't have a number for you now.
But you assume it has some sort of impact.
Yes. So we're looking at every line item that way. Supply, office supplies. You know, we probably have 10 years worth of Post-it notes upstairs somewhere.
Send it out to the
Travel.
schools, they'll need
So
them.
there's a disparity in travel dollars across different departments. So we're making them fill out, here's my travel plan, and it's instead of just throwing money out there to say, hey, I want to spend $20,000 on PD or whatever. So we're making people get very, very specific and defensible, what you're traveling on. Is it bringing outcomes to the district? So there's a lot of opportunity. I just don't have it numerically calculated yet.
Can I ask one more? I'm sorry, noticing that we do have policies about local vendors, local contractors, and meeting certain stipulations and what have you, especially with the presence of a new superintendent and leadership team. Have we been tracking if we would be the contracts? Are we having more varied contracts, more or less local contracts, or are these contracts more expensive, less expensive? Has there been a change? I mean, I would assume there should be. It's an inquiry, not a criticism, but
so
what are we noticing?
The competitive bidding process is managed in the purchasing department, which is under the chief operations office. That's outside of what we're doing.
Right.
They have, when they do a request for proposal, the team that writes out the scope of what they want to accomplish is supposed to come up with a decision matrix following board policy on small business owner, minority business owners, local, and you're supposed to get points for those. So I would recommend having the purchasing director come and do a presentation on how that happens.
That's a good idea, but please the chair.
Either to finance or to audit or wherever you want it done, but I want to speak for her or her process.
It just as old timer, there's been some contracts that appear to be pretty large, especially in like professional development or something, and it could be a total exception on my part, but I think it would be interesting to see as we have different vendors, both the diversity and the expertise that they're offering. I think that would be important to see, because I think that would help us evaluate what we're doing. Thanks.
I have one more question. I try not to ask a lot of questions, but I lied. I ask a lot of questions. I just wanted to give everybody a funny for today. So with regard to the contracts that we cut, many of those contracts were local vendors, were minority vendors. And I've asked this question before because it does concern me that part of our drive is to maintain some local vendors and some dollars in our community.
I don't remember the stats, but that was part of the presentation that I did for Finance Committee that broke down the diversity codes, the locality. I don't remember off the top of my head, but it was a lot more balanced than you might think it was. I'll pull it up. When you keep talking, I'll pull it up.
We need to be concerned about that that we're maintaining that from our standpoint, that as we are looking at it from a dollars standpoint consideration, we also need to be certain that we are equitable with regard to the distribution of funds.
Absolutely.
From our local level too. Okay. I promise. For now.
No, that was a great conversation. Thank you all. So if it works well for everyone, we're going to go ahead and change gears over to fiscal 24. So that was the look back where we've been, and this is the look into where we're headed. So Rob, if you don't mind pulling up the presentation slides also labeled 1D, that would be great. And then for everyone else, if you would like to refer to the internal audit plan, I've got some slides just to talk us through that. He gets that pulled up. Wonderful. All right. So this year's plan is something we're really excited to present. I think this is a pivotal shift for internal audit, but also the audit committee as we look to where have we been and really where are we headed next. So on the first slide, you'll see an overview of our risk assessment process. So as a reminder, internal audit spends 2 months per year between May and June, this meeting, performing a robust risk assessment. And the way that we do this is we essentially evaluate every budget unit within the district. So for context, a budget unit is a part of the accounting string, the account code, if you will, that indicates where funds are either spent or received. So as we evaluate things on a budget level, it helps us get insight into the financial aspects as well. So that's everything we could audit. So looking at 128, how do we narrow that down and choose the highest priority? So the most important thing to us as a starting point is stakeholder input. Not only do we want to ensure we're representing the needs of the district and all of our stakeholders, it also is what we use in terms of information to inform us as to where the risks and opportunities lie. So we sent out a survey and it was completed by 54 members of our district administration. That was the highest response rate we've ever seen. It includes members of our executive leadership team, directors, as well as people who are key process holders. So in addition to that feedback, they submitted a 10 to 15 question survey giving us insights into their biggest challenges this year, biggest opportunities, where they spend their money, any financial system changes, questions like that, so we can put our arms around it. We also worked closely with our board members. Our finance committee board members were kind enough to spend a lot of time talking with us this year about their priorities and how we can help support them. And then finally, we had a robust 3-hour meeting with our audit committee chairs a couple of weeks ago. So they were kind enough to come in and sit and go through the entire methodology with us, as well as the plan that we're proposing today. So we're going to do our best to give you the 10-minute version of that 3-hour meeting today. So just know we asked a lot of questions and had a lot of good conversation to vet this through. So with that all being said, the methodology, as a reminder, we do evaluate on a financial audit, functional and entity level risk. And then we break those down into sub-processes. That's been the real shift over the last few years. I know in the past, I think, Liz, you had said, okay, I see your top 10 budget units. As you can see now on page 5, you can see those top 10 budget units. And then the question was, how do you select an audit within those? So we've been doing this big shift in the way we've audited or done our risk assessment, rather, into adding in the processes behind those budget units. So as you think of 128 budget units, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of processes within each of those. So this has been a slow growth, but we've been focused on the most critical areas of the district. However, as I will speak to soon, this is a big undertaking, and in order to do this to the level we know we need to do, it's going to take an investment of time. So with all that being said, we see these top 10 outlined on page 5, and our reaction was, well, gosh, we've really audited these thoroughly over the last 8 years. And so where does that position us now? Those audits still have outstanding recommendations in many of them. Also, it's really, taking a step beyond that. And so where that leads us as well is to the schools. So the schools as a combination of 70 budget units, that's one big area. So I'll get to explain the projects we propose, but that's how we've adapted this risk assessment to say, okay, not just the top 10 budget unit, but what does that really mean as we expand beyond that? We'll check. Wonderful. So we'll move on to the next slide. So the engagements for this year. We, in the past, have always categorized into 3 buckets. Assurance, which is our typical audits. They result in a report. Our advisory projects, which are management-led and result in more of a memo, as we just went over before. And then follow-up audits, things that we've previously audited and we come back and see how things are going. So you'll see those 3 categories as well as 2 additional. When we come to those, I will explain. So as I mentioned, school audits. This is an area that we have not gotten into thus far. So we have spent a lot of time thinking through and auditing centralized processes with the expectation they roll out to the schools, they impact the schools. So now is the time for us to get out into those schools to say, how are things going? Not only will it give us insight into centralized processes and how they're implemented at a school level, it will help us gain a more thorough understanding of risk and opportunity at each unique school location. So we tend to talk about in our risk assessment schools, but as we all know, each school is a unique community, a unique business unit, if you will. And that, I think, is a huge opportunity for a multi-year plan or multi-year project that we create a foundation this year that we can execute on an annual basis. So that's a huge opportunity that we will spend time, and as we see from a reporting standpoint in partnership with the audit committee, is perhaps we design something, go out to some schools, gather feedback, and maybe share iterations of this with you throughout the year for your guidance as well. So I think this is going to be that year to design and change and improve, and hopefully get something that we can utilize in the long run. Continuous auditing, that is a build upon the project we just shared, the one that covered employee reimbursements and P cards. So our goal this year is to continue doing that on a quarterly basis. It shouldn't be a big lift now that it's been built, and expand into a couple of additional areas. So overtime would be another good one, as we've seen, keep a pulse, as well as potentially into security. So we do need to talk with management a bit more about what the data readiness will look like. But thinking of past audits, those are some examples that we can continue to keep a pulse and ensure things are going properly. So that concludes the assurance piece. Any questions on the first 2 projects before I move to our next area? Yeah, absolutely.
So I would say I think it's really a helpful tool to look at the school level audits as well, because I do think we've talked about some of the things that where we've identified the problem being not in central, but in how information is communicated to central. And yet we haven't really done the assessment of what's their method of communicating it or what the tools they might need to do it better. But I also think that it will help in things like the KPI measurements that we're looking at. Because of the level of decentralization that we do, it's going to be very difficult for everyone to make those same assessments or do those same evaluations at the decentral level that we would be able to more manage at the central level. So if we have folks who are measuring certain performance indicators that are measuring them very differently than we expected them to, I don't think we would know that until we look at the school level audits.
Lauren, how do you define risk? What is risk?
So risk is the chance anything could go wrong, of course, but we define it as outlined on page 4 into various categories. So essentially, we look at things from numerous angles. So there's the financial risk, of course. That's often the one we think of first. But as we expand, you think of things in terms of strategic risk. I know that's a conversation Dr. Moffitt and I had, is how does internal audit help alert or prevent things that could disrupt this ultimate execution and success of a strategic plan that's set by the board. So we look at risk from various lenses to ensure we have an all-encompassing view.
Is that stealing money?
That is an example of a risk, absolutely.
Or money being spent where it is unauthorized?
Yeah, that's another risk.
So those are risks.
Yes.
They're not necessarily looking at material misstatement on financial.
Not necessarily. That's typically handled by the auditor of state.
So the risk is that money is being spent in an unauthorized way, or that it's being taken by people.
That is one.
Terms.
But as we talk through our risk, as this robust risk assessment, we have hundreds, if not thousands, of versions of risk. And so it's all about weighting them to say there's some risk that's good. You know, there's a cost to mitigating all risk. And I don't think that's a position we ever want to get into, but meeting risk in a way that fits our risk appetite as an organization, I think is you'll see through this project we're proposing as we move along, that's a piece we could look at more holistically to say, we have thousands of risks, thousands of places these things can happen. What do we organizationally feel is our score holistically or at an individual level? And does that meet what we're comfortable with? And so that's really our goal as we look at things bigger picture, even at a school level. So we're talking macro and micro when we talk about school or department level. And does it align with what we expect and that we're comfortable with? And if not, do we need to take interventions? Do we need to audit to learn more? Yeah, great question.
With the emphasis on schools, and I don't know, this is relatively new for the Finance Committee in the last few months, and Treasurer's been aware of it too, but I do think the community is much more demanding of knowing the costs per school instead of the macro approach to everything. As much as we want to centralize or decentralize or whatever our history is, I think the idea of the cost and the benefit and the value and knowing it school by school by school is something that the community is going to be demanding to know much more as we go forward, and based upon our concerns about our future financial sustainability and availability of funds. I think that emphasis is going to be crucial for understanding really where those dollars are being spent and how to measure from an equitable standpoint, but also just as a sustainable point. Because it can really get lost in the macro. And in the individual school piece, that's where the community's interest is, very much so. So I think the more we do this and are so cognizant of trying to shift what's spent at the schools and what have you, I think the better we'll be as we perhaps face the need for new money in the near time.
Yeah, that's great feedback.
I know in the past we talked about resources for your staff and with the continuous audits, and I know you said that it wasn't a heavy lift. And I know I read somewhere where you guys are going to allocate some of the resources to the staff and for professional development, but do you have enough resources for the continuing audits as well as like the one, I think there was one that you were recommending to add to the list for continuous audits? So are you guys okay with the resources that you have available?
Great question. So I think we have a solid approach for this year. So as we'll cover with the professional development, we are asking we're recommending a shift. So we've done a lot of co-sourcing in the past where we have realized upon reflection that investment can get us 10 times as much if we do it internally from a cost per hour standpoint. And so what we've proposed this year is promoting it from within as well as expanding into a half FTE for an intern. So I think that would be a good approach for this year. And a lot of our work this year is to develop more plans for the next 3 to 5 years. And so I feel comfortable after this year and we say, hey, these are our opportunities as we progress. What do we want to invest in, and do we have the manpower to do so? I think that's when we'll be able to come and say, are we well staffed to hit those those checkpoints as we move to the future? So I think we're in good shape for this year, but I do think that will be a question that we have to decide in terms of growth, to what rate do we want to grow and meet these things, and if we want to meet them in a certain period, we have the staff to do so. So yeah, that's a great question. Wonderful. So moving on to the next piece, I'll be really succinct and brief about our advisory project. So this past year, we worked on the cash handling work via advisory that we reported on at the May meeting. And of course, with a little bit of scope creep, it came to our, we were invited in to speak more with the Treasurer's Office around donations, crowdfunding, and fundraising. So you may say those 3 terms sound alike, and we say we agree. And so this year's project is to partner with Jen's teams to, of course, with their leadership, this is a management-owned project, to partner with them to more clearly define what those three things mean and how do we create policy and procedure, not internal audit, but how does management create policy and procedure that clearly articulates for the district the process. What we found anecdotally is that there's a lot of individual process at a school level, and we believe there's a need for a centralized way for people who want to give to the district to do so with reliability. So that's how we'll support that project and work this year. Wonderful. So we'll move right along to our follow-up. So this ties back to the conversation we had at this month's Finance Committee meeting. Dr. Moffitt said, well, all of those audits you've done in the past, how do you know they're being implemented? And so to answer that, in the past, in the same time frame, these 2 months, May and June, our team has followed up on existing recommendations. What we found, though, is we have so many past audits at this point that once a year, 2 month window in the midst of planning really isn't sufficient and isn't necessarily the best approach to check in on something once a year. So this year's plan is to develop an automated process through what we use as a smart sheet tool, but essentially building this framework out, assigning management owners, which we should have, but there's been some shifts in leadership, reassigning those recommendations to Mr. Craig's point that we talked about, making sure they're still relevant. Do they need to be adapted a little based on current landscape? But then sending out automated requests on a quarterly basis. So throughout the year, we're keeping a pulse of where things stand. And ultimately, you'll see in my goals, one of the things we'd like to do is create more of like a dashboard of where things stand. So at any moment, we could say, here's how many things have been addressed in terms of past recommendations, in progress, not started, abandoned, to give us some insight into that true value and are we seeing the loop closed on our recommendations. So you can see the common theme here is setting ourselves up for success as we start to expand because we don't want to outpace ourselves. So any questions on advisory or follow-up?
I would just, I really appreciated the large list of what was the status. I mean, I think that was really essential, but I think to hold the administration accountable and the district accountable, I think that should be a report in a very regularized, routine way to this audit committee. And the audit committee should be able to hold the administration and the district and the board accountable for that. Because you look at that list, I wonder, again, since we're so focused on budget, if this had been done, would this still be costing? I think y'all need to be able to hold the board, hold the administration, and the district accountable. Or if indeed something is no longer relevant, or hey, really, maybe we overstated it, that you can keep it as a living document. But I think this committee needs to hold the district accountable. That is a crucial function. You might have to change your charter or whatever, but I think we need that outside look-see.
Well, in all honesty, that's what Lauren and I talked about. I thought, and I think that her team and her position by reporting directly to the board should help us hold the departments that report to us, the treasurer and the administration, accountable to are you making suggestions that are getting implemented that can help the process to hold to the policies that we're saying we are important to us. So I just feel like this needs to be raised a little bit from the audit perspective, so that we can see if we are being equitable in our funding. Are we being, that's a policy, that's a board policy. Are we following the things that the board has charged administration and the treasurer's office to do? I look at it like a checks and balances, and I just don't think that we are utilizing you or your team enough to give us that feedback. And it's not to disintegrate any department, it's to kind of hold us accountable to, are we being efficient? Where are we being inefficient? And where can we do better? And how can what we are charging the treasurer and the administration to do, how, with regard to equity and being responsible, how is that return on investment? What is that KPI? So that's my thought. and you've done the work, you've done some things. If they haven't been implemented, why? And I just think that we need to be more supportive in that. And I just think that at the school level, I don't see it as a bad thing. The schools are little individual businesses, and they should be individual businesses. We have 52 neighborhoods that are very, very unique. And so some of the decentralization at the school level of some things I see is a good thing. I think it is our responsibility to make sure that every school principal that operates that little business is educated, and that's where I think the breakdown is. I think that we need more financial planning. Maybe you need more people, because I think that the
You're not getting them.
I'm trying to plug. I'm trying to take that mic off her. I'm trying to plug, but I think that we will be more efficient when we have more education from the treasurer, with regard to finance, policy, all of that. We need to make sure that that's being done, and so. I'm a push for more, but it's in the education to me that we can find out if we're being efficient.
So Lauren, just like a whistleblower situation, somebody from the school would contact you and say, custodian Bill played basketball for 2 hours while he's on the clock.
In
I'm
what
a very
context
practical person.
do you mean? Are you referring to the school audits?
Well, the reporting, you ask the schools to report quarterly on things.
So,
Would that be an example of something they might report up to you?
no, so that would be different. So what this is the status of past internal audit recommendations that have been made. So let's say benefits. Did you do X that we recommended? If so, where do you stand on that? Or if not, why not? And so that's more of the follow-up that we mean. Of course, though, we do have a system in place separately from this. If people would like to report those types of instances, there's a form on our website as well as a link to the Auditor of State for them to make those types of reports.
Well, you said overtime. That's the first thing we talked about, unauthorized overtime. And that would be an example of somebody getting paid overtime for not working. And that's where I'm coming from.
Yeah, definitely.
Just maybe to that point, I think some of this is also about there's the audit of the processes that are being used versus the audit of the work. And so I think in a large part what we have been saying is stuff like payroll is a great example where we've recognized that the struggle with payroll is that you have decentral folks inputting payroll into the system. So sure, everybody in the central office does everything perfectly great and it still doesn't get paid. Where did that mistake happen in that process? And I think that is a little bit more of where they're looking at. So for instance, if we know that there's a school where we've seen a bit of dramatic numbers of overtime, maybe that's a school that we look at and see whether or not they're using overtime in an effective manner. If it's not, then it may become the task of that school and the task of the administration to then say who's abusing the overtime, who's using hours that they shouldn't be, who's basically milking hours or whatever. But it's important to know, like, if we have one school where no one does any overtime and they seem to have a lot of work get done, you have a school where everybody seems to have overtime, we may need to say, what's going on? Why does it exist? And I think that's the audit we've never really done to explain those things, or even things like reimbursements. I think of that in a lot of ways. We have some places, some parts of our organization, some parts of the districts, they may have a ton of reimbursements for things, whereas other parts may have next to none, and is that may be appropriate or may be right, but it also may be something we need to know.
I think to your point, Lauren, you said Rothenberg had the leak. So we were pulling an audit report. Rothenberg's facilities is going to be hugely an outlier. But when you pull the report and you look at it, it's like, okay, they had a leak. So they had to have the 10,000 hours. So it could also be justification to explain what's going on as well. It doesn't have to necessarily be a negative that somebody's milking hours. It could very well be, we had this happen, and so that was a consequence of that. Is my mind is how I think about it. I don't want to think that they were stealing hours, but it could be.
It happens.
Yeah, wonderful. And I really appreciate the insight and input there. I think, just to circle back quickly to the school point, I think it's a huge opportunity. And so I think that's why I want this to be an ongoing conversation with the audit committee to say, based on feedback, based on our analysis, here's where we're going to start. And what do we think? Is this the right, are these the right criteria to look at? Because there's so many things we could look at, but what's the I'm excited to conversation with this group to make sure we're gaining that insight and designing this program the right way. So thank you for the feedback. So on to the next slide. I mentioned there's going to be a new category. So this really shouldn't be that surprising. As I've said, I will tell you about this soon. So now is the moment around risk analysis. So I think we've talked about this in, drum roll please, this is so exciting. We're excited. Can you tell that we think this stuff's cool? But at least somebody does. People are listening wrong. Our thousands of fans, I'm sure, agree. So you can tell through our earlier conversation, the risk matrix is a huge opportunity, and it's really what we need to get to that next level of audit. We could have said, okay, here's some other things we kind of intelligently selected, pulled out of a hat for our next set of audits, but why do our work that way? We need to build a more robust risk assessment that looks at processes and looks at the organization holistically, as well as on that granular level. So this is an ongoing project, but really the investment this year is to develop that framework, to build things out further than we've done during this brief 2-month planning window each year, and gain a better understanding of organizational risk. So our goal with this is to identify potential gaps, and through that, we can report that either to management, to the board audit committee, if it's more informational, or say we need more data, and that maybe is an area that should be audited. And so you can think of this kind of through that ERM lens. I wouldn't say that's what internal audit should do, but in our organization, we kind of are the risk-focused team. And so I think it's a good opportunity for us to try to put those pieces together. So not only will we do this from an organizational risk standpoint, the other side to this is IT risk management and assessment. So Emma comes to us with an IT background, and if you talk to other audit teams, it's really hard to find an IT auditor. They're very valuable, and we know why. And so this is a project Emma has laid out a thorough plan on page 8 of the document of the internal audit plan with a 3-year projection of what the next steps could look like. So what this really means is internal audit needs to gain more comfort and understanding over our IT systems, specifically those that are financial in nature, as we utilize data from those systems in all of our audits. So our audits and our understandings are only as good as the data that we've derived from the system. So if you think of a publicly traded company, even some other school districts we've met and governmental groups we've met at conferences, this is something that those shops are doing. Those internal audit shops are mapping out the IT risk. So I'm sure Emma can answer any questions on that if you have questions, but this is again developing this matrix so we can maintain it on a yearly basis, but without setting aside time, it's just truly not going to happen otherwise. Any questions on organizational risk matrix or IT risk assessment?
So the scope for this year for the IT is really just risk assessment. It's documenting, it's coming up with a plan.
It'll be pretty, I don't want to say simple because it's not going to be simple, but most of it's going to be documenting what we have, so internal audit can use it. There's a lot of information on systems and applications that are more IT and financial technology driven, but we need something that we can kind of look back to that says, how do we cover completeness? How do we cover accuracy? How do we cover segregation of duties? And once we have that, eventually we can go and test some of these things that you would in ITGC, which we don't even have a template for right now. So that would be another thing that we kind of have to build out for ourselves. Because what I wouldn't want to ever happen is us test a process and we say we have completeness and accuracy over this data and this system, but we don't have anything documented to support that other than the general statement that we put on all of our audit paperwork. So then we kind of have the backup for everything. And eventually, if we can map the controls to all of our processes and kind of do a risk assessment at that level, which is very far down the line right now. That's kind of the overall goal, but it's going to take a while to get there. And I think, next year, depending on what the plan looks like, we can kind of implement some of that stuff within the audits that whatever those audits might be.
Do you guys have the resources? Have you ever done an IT audit before, you guys?
Yeah, so I came from EY and I was an IT risk auditor there.
Fantastic. Fantastic.
Yep, we got the reasons.
We sure do. And so perfect timing if we can move to the next slide. This is the final piece of, this is a robust plan, but everything is setting us up for success. And speaking of long-term success and goals as it relates to the internal audit department, the badge of approval, the thing that all internal audit groups want is to pass a peer review. And what that means is you have a set of audit standards in place and you are compliant with those standards over a period of 3 to 5 years. And that says this internal audit shop is performing to the level that everyone can rely upon. So backing out of that, how do we get there is the question. And so the first thing we need to do is work on documenting our compliance with the Institute of Internal Audit standards. That is the oversight board. For comparison, our state auditors use the governmental accounting or audit standards. So every audit group has a set. So our plan this year is to develop a multi-year approach to what we need to accomplish each year to ensure that we can eventually pass a peer review. So when we think of the time frame, you have to have 3 to 5 years of good compliance. Well, we're a year or two away from being fully compliant. So this is a long-term project that I think we need to make the investment now so we do reach that level of professionalism. And speaking of professionalism, we have great news. We will be making some changes in our internal audit department. As I mentioned before, switching from that co-sourcing approach and building from within is our premise. We're continuing to invest in our certifications. Emma's pursuing her certified internal auditor's license. Isaac's pursuing his CPA. And then due to Isaac's hard work and time with us, he's been with us 4 years, it is time for him to be promoted to an internal audit supervisor. So we are making and asking that recommendation to this group via the plan for him to be promoted to the supervisor level effective August 1st. He has earned that through his tremendous hard work, and he's well outgrown his staff responsibilities and his those supervisor roles. So yes, it's a huge congratulations to Isaac. So that is the trajectory of our internal audit department. I think it's aligned with the board's goal of growing and maintaining from within and maintaining top talent. So we're really fortunate to have this good team, and to answer Clarice, your question before, do we have the resources? I think we've got the team for the job that we've presented this year. So final note, we'll continue to align, Robbie, on the next slide, with the board strategy, and as that new strategic document comes through, I think there's a lot of opportunity and plan to adapt further as things are more fine-tuned from a board level. But ultimately, our goal is to support the work of the board, support the will of the audit committee, and help our administration meet their goals for the year as well. So that concludes the presentation of our fiscal 24 audit plan, and I welcome any questions or comments. I think we did a good job conversing throughout, so that's wonderful. Good to hear. So really quickly, I know we're quite a bit over, but I do also want to present to you my fiscal 23-24 goals for this year. They are somewhat similar in context from previous goals, but we do have a couple items to note. Expanding the risk assessment as this has been discussed, as well as that communication tool. I think speaking to the board members' points before, keeping the top items within fingers reach, I think is really important. So that's another topic that's additional this year. So if there aren't any questions, I may turn back over to Vice Chair Guthridge to lead us through a vote and a roll call vote of both the plan and my goals for approval this year.
All right, so I think if no one has any objections, we can take one vote on approving the fiscal year 2024 plan, as well as the Chief Audit Executive goals for the year. Can someone, what? Yes. Will someone propose a motion to approve the plans? Is there a second? Okay, so we're going to do a roll call vote.
Liz Guttridge,
Yes.
Jim Crossett,
Yes.
David Foote,
Yes.
Tim Heldman.
I have a question, of course. On page 13, the back page of the internal audit plan, so you got 4 items. You got school audits, assurance, risk matrix, other, donations and fundraising advisory. It looks like your plan is a little bit smaller than it has been in the past.
Yes.
Am I imagining things?
No, it's definitely less topics, but I would say all of these are much bigger individually. So less
So you're going to
numerous.
focus, the school audits is going to be your primary focus.
Yeah, from an audit standpoint, continuous auditing, touching numerous areas is kind of how we're getting that breadth, if you will, as well as through those school audits.
So no more benefits or payroll follow-up, you're done with that?
For the time being, they have a lot of work to do on those areas. And
So the departments do? Okay.
yeah.
Okay, I approve the plan.
Okay. I'll just say really quickly too that I think the part of the your system that you're going to be setting up for following up on the audits will be an effective way for Lauren's team to regularly assess the status of the audits that have been done in the past. And it sounds like we'll work in some regular reporting to us too on those audits. So they're not necessarily re-auditing, but the plan is to still follow up more regularly and with some more accountability on, are those recommendations being implemented? And yeah, it does sound like because of the turnover and management that some of those departments do need more time to implement some of those recommendations. And the other thing I'll say too, just briefly, based on the planning meeting that we had, is this year is really more focused on investing in future efficiencies and future accountability in terms of the risk matrix, the compliance standards. So there are fewer specific audits, but I feel really good that this year will be foundation building, and that will allow the team to really, work more efficiently and effectively going forward. Even though we already approved the plan, but that's my 2 cents.
Phyllis was not able to hear the person who seconded the motion. Can you?
I second it.
Just make sure Mike's on. Yep.
I second it.
Oh, thank you. I'm sorry. And then we have Clarice Warner.
Yes.
Brandon Craig.
Yes.
Dr. Kareem Moffett. Yes. Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you all so much for the time today. I'm really excited.
All right. So moving on, we are pretty well over our scheduled time, but I think probably the financial discussion, other business, will be brief, maybe. Do you have a lot to share, or?
We can be as brief as you need me to be.
Okay. So we will go through the audit committee goals and work plan for the upcoming year. And I don't think this will be a really long conversation, but hopefully we can get a little bit of discussion going, and then we'll just hit the last couple items quickly. So, Lauren, did you want to give us an overview of what we're doing, and then we can...
So I can tee it up pretty quickly, and luckily we do have kind of a 15-minute buffer with the other business, so hopefully we can combine there. So the next aspect of today's conversation relates back to the audit committee charter and board policy, which requires the audit committee to set annual goals and then do a version of a self-assessment to say, are we achieving what we set out to do? So the first document you have in your next set of packet there is a memo that was provided last year. And so this was the fiscal 2023 set of goals that we focused on this year. So we would like to have a bit of discussion, and I'll let our vice chair facilitate that about upon reflection, how do we think we did? Are there things we need to adjust? Or the second document, the fiscal 2024 audit committee goals. So that other document you have there is nothing more than an update on the calendar, the schedule of accountability, and then I copy pasted the 23 over to 24 so we can edit from there. And the other document you have is our work plan. So the audit committee work plan basically breaks out every component of that charter I mentioned into a specific meeting for this upcoming year. So that's kind of our compliance side from an audit committee standpoint, that we accomplish everything. And then this other document is just for informational purposes around the new members. And a kind reminder to two of our audit committee members, Carol and Clarice, that their current term will be coming to an end at the end of this calendar year. And we kindly hope that they consider joining us for another term, but luckily they've got a few months to think on it. So we'll be on our best behavior the next few months. So, so I'll turn it back over to Liz to cover this.
All right. So, yeah, so our last year's goals, we kind of talked about three main areas. So member preparation for the meetings, meeting content, and then how do we measure or hold ourselves accountable to have an impact on the district. In looking through this, I think I still think these are good goals. So I think like starting with a copy paste to the future year is good. I do think we probably have some unmet goals from last year, and I would welcome a discussion around any of this. But one thing that stood out to me, so I think the coming prepared to the meetings with having reviewed all of the documents and staying involved in the finance committee meetings, as well as, if possible, the general board meetings. I know that's been very helpful for me, and I don't know that there's really a way a lot of times that we know whether or not that's happening, in our discussion. But I still think that's a good goal, and I think that's something we should continue to pursue and have the expectation that the members are doing that. Content, I think that we didn't really have a lot of the functional areas provide presentations, and that's probably something that we should include in our planning or in our checklist to make sure that we're kind of hitting those. I know we only have 6 meetings per year, so maybe we try to come up with a list of 4 that we definitely know we want to have in, and then we can leave a couple spots for departments du jour that might have stuff going on throughout the year. And then accountability, I think that's always going to be a challenge because we work at, we're just in an advisory capacity. It's hard for us to measure our impact, but I'm open to any suggestions that people have on how we could incorporate some sort of ROI or KPI measurement into our work. So, is there any comments or questions or suggestions on our plan for FY24?
Well, quantifying reduction in overtime is one, right? That's big.
I will say overtime did go down. It went down by I don't know the number off the top of my head, but when we did our analysis, it did go down.
That's good.
And just so you know, the function of overtime was highly correlated to the number of vacancies in the district, in particular on custodians. And so we had a lot of custodians working a lot of time to keep buildings clean. So there's a effort to completely fill all of our vacancies. So that will drive overtime down.
To have an analysis of overtime versus the savings you have in your position.
Correct. I think this year we finished with, correct me if I'm wrong, about $20 million in salary savings due to vacancies. 20 million. Did I say million? Yeah.
So do I need to take overtime away from that? Because the existing custodian has to work more overtime? So it's a not, netting it's not 20 million. Net, it's a far smaller number.
Yeah, it'll be a smaller number, but I don't, do you know off the top of your head how much money we spent in overtime across the district?
I think it was like 1.6.
Yeah.
Oh, so it's about 20 million then. Okay.
I will say the biggest issue is just last year, the lack of an actual approval method, and this year that's when they're implementing. So we have more insight to see what overtime has worked and what it's for. And I think that's a big help in kind of combating, knowing there's open vacancies among, random school floodings that just not good, but yeah.
So I guess we'll bring it back to our goals here. And I will just throw a question out to the committee members on this first meeting preparation area. Do you feel like you have the resources that you need to find the meetings or attend them live? Find the meeting materials. Is that process working well? Because I know Lauren's put in some, or maybe someone on her team, Lauren's team has done a lot of work this year on giving us better access to meeting recordings, minutes, agendas, and things. So is that helping people to get more engaged in the district's business? And is there anything that might help even more, reduce friction, I would say, in getting involved in watching those meetings?
I think the things that morning team and others who assisted put together to provide us with the information on when the meetings are and the packets and how we get it. I think that has been remarkable. I mean, it's been great. It's been a lot of information. I think it's the time and when they have the meetings that conflict with other things that I have going on. So trying to find that happy and then find the time to view the recording has also been a challenge. And I know last year we talked about kind of putting together, when we talked about how will we evaluate ourselves, putting together some sort of chart or graph or something where we can say, okay, well, maybe a SMART goal for us, how many people looked at XYZ meeting during this time frame, and we can tick that off and say, yeah, we did that, versus trying to figure, and I don't know where we landed on that, but I think that would be something that will help us during this time where we can actually say, oh, this is what we've done. And
Yeah, I think that we always want our goals to be SMART, right? So I think that, yeah, it is hard to really get a sense of whether or not people are doing that. And so I think that would be helpful. I agree, the meetings, I mean, you guys sit through them live, but they are hard to watch, hard to get through sometimes.
They're hard to live through.
Yes, when we watch them later, we can speed it up a little bit. But
Maybe cut stuff.
But I do think it's important. I mean, it provides a ton of context, and I know I have been personally like doing pretty well with the finance committee meetings, but watching the regular board meetings is still a challenge. It's not something I get to very often, but I think that those even you know, provide way more context about big picture, and not just what the topics that we're talking about here. And so I think that's very helpful. So I think we can continue with the same goals, and are we going to approve this, or will this, do we
We can approve
finalize it next
If
time,
there
or?
are changes, we can move forward and adopt them now,
Okay.
unless anyone has any other.
Yeah, I guess I don't know if we want to add some sort of I don't know, like a little checklist to say that you've done these things, or if we want to just, that maybe feels a little bit too descriptive.
I mean, we have it in the second bullet of the last, and the impact of audit committee is actually listed there, but we just never put anything on there. What?
Okay. Maybe at our next planning meeting, we could talk through, we can brainstorm, bring some ideas to our next audit committee planning meeting. Then maybe we can try to develop some kind of tool for accountability.
Yeah.
Or measuring, I say.
Yes, and yeah, I think we can also, you know, maybe work on streamlining expectations around, like, here's the one meeting you should watch, or here's the, you know, maybe the half of the meeting that's the most important.
I think probably the tool, I think schools are pretty good at taking attendance.
I do think, and my memory might be a little bit hazy on this, but I think the chair spoke about previously also creating kind of a list of what are the highlights or things for folks to identify, and so maybe using something like that as a checklist of folks' kind of self-accountability as to things to go and pay attention to of what happened at meetings. Because I think he had mentioned trying to put something like that together.
Yeah, even like timestamps, like listen to this 10 minutes, listen to this 20 minutes. I think those are all good ideas that we can maybe flesh out a little bit.
I mean, technically, I think we report to the finance committee, isn't that correct? The finance committee is made up of board members. If you guys have any concerns, please communicate those to us. We can, you know, get Lauren on the case. Okay, that's my only comment.
I think on the presentations, I think we had a suggestion of the contract ROI folks.
Yeah, was that the one that you wrote down, or?
That's purchasing the RFP.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Another, just really quickly, another person that we've been working with closely over the last year is Chris Burkhart, who is our Chief Operating Officer. So as we talk about overtime and facilities and facility rental, all of these pieces have like a peripheral impact on our audits. And we thought he could be an interesting person to come speak about how he's holistically making some adjustments in operations as well. So another one maybe we add to the list.
I remember food service came
Yeah.
one time. That was very interesting. Transportation has come at least twice. We've talked to them. You know, hearing presentations from the functional areas, of the district, I don't know if we provide any value or not, but it does provide, it's interesting. Sometimes we have some good suggestions.
I'll say that I did promise to be quieter, but from a sitting on the budget and finance, it would be great to have an extra set of eyes, look at the meetings, and then provide the chair with some information to share with us as committee members of what you see or hear, or questions that you may see, because we're in the trenches, in the board trenches, but you may have a different perspective to be able to say, hey, you know what? I heard this and I have another question. And then Board Member Bolton is the chair. She can maybe either get clarity and then have that at the next month's meeting, or we can discuss it on the floor with that bird's eye view that you all have inputted. So I think that the view that you all have is a different one, but it's a good one to kind of help us stay accountable on what we're saying, because we're in the moment with some of those documents. And some of those documents we will have just seen, so maybe we didn't have a lot of time to digest the information. But you all looking back at it can say, hey, you didn't answer that question, or I really do have the need for more clarity. So going back, and if one person views it, then they can kind of time date stamp it and send it out to everybody else to say, hey, go here, 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 and maybe take turns on the meeting. Like, okay, you get July, I had August or whatever. So just so that it's not so daunting. Because board member Bolton keeps us in finance quite a long time. Quite a long time. So,
And you're witnessing one of the reasons.
because I ask a lot of questions.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the purpose of our financial discussion. We've been trying to incorporate more finance committee feedback. So I think that's something that we should just continue to do and try to come up with some strategies to help us focus those discussions a little bit more.
And to add to that, I would probably say if comments or views or some suggestions, I think if you put that through Lauren, it probably would be the better way than necessarily directly to me or different folks. I think that because she can get that to us.
There you go.
And I do think we have as a board, we still have a cloudy view regarding the board's relationship to the audit committee. It is. I mean, they say, oh, did y'all go? Yeah, okay, fine. And then everybody moves on. But I think that the accountability issue regarding your recommendations, I think would help us. And impact on the budget would help us get all 7 board members kind of interested in doing that. But yeah, as you have reactions to those meetings, please throw them through Lauren and she'll get to us. We know she will, for sure. Good idea.
Okay, so we're running out of time. So do we need to adopt these, or can we include our discussion of
I don't
these?
think we voted last year.
Okay,
so
we're just,
if everyone's,
we're reviewing it.
Yeah, and I think we can start with them.
Okay. Okay, and then in terms of the impact, I think, that's just going to be an ongoing discussion, project by project, of how can we as a committee measure our impact, not necessarily measure the internal audit's impact, but how are we impacting, per department and the finance committee. So, okay, so let's wrap that up. Financial discussion.
Speed talk. It's June 28th. We still don't have a state budget. The House bill version would have increased our revenues by $20 million over last year, or the current year, mostly because they agreed to the 6-year phase-in. So remember, they adopted a fair funding formula, and they had a 6-year phase-in to fund it. And so we're going into year 3. So they agreed to continue that. They updated the cost factors, the base cost factors from 2018 to 2022, meaning they updated the cost of a teacher and different positions so that we're not using 2018 salaries to do our funding. The Senate bill agreed to do those 2 things, but they actually changed the wealth factor, the wealth index calculation. They removed the median income, which made us wealthier. And so instead of getting 20 million more, we're only going to get 6 million. These are all simulations. So until they finally approve and get the real stuff out, we don't really know what our revenues are going to be like, which is one reason why we don't have a district budget yet. And so Monday night, the board very graciously approved a temporary appropriation to get us started for the year. Instead of calculating 90 days worth of cost, they just went with half the budget and asked for a $300 million because the downside of doing the 90-day calculation was everybody started their contracts for 90 days, but then they'd forget to amend them. And then we'd get in out trouble. And I couldn't pay the bills and, so on and so forth. So unintended consequences. So we're right now, the other challenge with the budget is current year's budget was $613 million. Our forecast is driving it down to 588. So right off the top, we're looking at reductions. But $613 million, if we do nothing new, so we add 6 million to that based on step calculate state salaries in the collective bargaining agreement, $6 million on steps. We gave a 4% COLA, that's $12 million. We had the resource coordinators, the student wellness money dried up the grant, and so that $4.2 million of resource coordinators hitting the general fund. So we're already at a $60 million gap in our budget. And of course, in the 30 years I've been in this district, the budget ask is always greater than the target. And so we're trying to figure out how do we pare down, what are we not going to invest in? You simply can't keep shoving more water into a water bottle that's full. And so we're on round 3, and Mike has joined, new assistant treasurer, welcome. So we lost Kim to Mount Healthy, she's a treasurer, and then she took her grants manager with her as the assistant treasurer. So we are having some turnover in the department at a very busy time of year.
We've had some exodus from the district.
Yes.
That the audit committee needs to be aware of.
Forgot where I was. Round 3. So yes, and now we're playing bad cop, to get people down. And we're looking at everything. You know, I'm just slashing. So we're hoping to come back to the board on July 17th with a balanced budget with a clear identification of what isn't being funded and what is being funded, like new initiatives. Because we have a strategic plan we're working on as well. And so we're trying to focus our dollars on the things that drive the biggest outcomes rather than just doing what we've always done. So the state budget is in conference committee. We're hoping in the next 2 days they'll figure it out. I did hear a rumor that they're going to try to do a week extension, right? And so we may not even know then, but we'll certainly keep everybody updated. We're working hard, close the books. Do you have that slide deck I sent you? So look. No, I just shared it with you today, just like 15 minutes ago. It has the data that you were asking for. My name's Wagner. You know I love you.
Hey, Jen, so it looks like the only year we really had a surplus was the year we got our COVID money. Based on this schedule here, we have deficits every year up until that point, and then after it. Fiscal year 21 was the only time we had a
Where our
surplus.
revenue, right. So we deliberately let the current year budget grow to finish out the 3rd year of the strategic plan that got put on pause because of COVID. We had a new superintendent in house, and she had some strategic moves she wanted to make, with the agreement that we would go back to a balanced budget, meaning the budget couldn't exceed the revenues. So we're chewing into our cash balance. And based on the forecast, we're going back, the next levy's coming up on November 25. It's a renewal levy, the $48 million levy that was first enacted in 2017, with the $15 million set aside for preschool. Well, we've exceeded on an annual basis that $15 million revenue source. So we're chewing into the unspent cash balance for that project. We have okay, just hold one thought. Preschool expansion, state funding is declining. We have inflation. We're at a tight labor market. We're trying to compete with people to fill our vacancies. What else is out there? Oh, the ad hoc plan. So during the ad hoc committee, they were talking about the cost of transportation, and we transport citywide, right? And because we transport our kids citywide, we have to transport the charter and the non-public kids as well. I went back during that meeting and looked at the 2008 budget. Transportation was $22 million, and next year's ask is $50 million. So it's a huge, the school of choice and giving choice to our parents is awesome, but we can't financially sustain it. And it's our Department of Student Services. So Monday night, if you look at the board documents, I shared a 5-year historical perspective on budget, central office budgets from fiscal year 19, pre-COVID to now. the current year, and we had Department of Student Services doubled cost. And we have our autism families are coming, and we're digging in deeper to those things to look at what are our cost drivers and how can we minimize the negative movement towards our cash. But so I talked to the board Monday night about doing something with that levy in November of 25 to ask for either do a substitute levy, make it bigger, make it longer. Oh, we have the facility master plan, the $1 billion plan that we did, right, is now 18 years old. I saw a 5-year roof replacement plan was about $6 million a year, and we can't absorb that in our general operations. So we have to find money to pay for the boilers and the chillers and the roofs that have to be repaired on these plans. Even our newest building that was put into place in 2013 with Aiken High School was the last school to open under the facility master plan, is needing repairs. So all that being said, I've asked the board to start thinking about some new money. And we have to not let the budget grow.
And I would say the board's also asked the treasurer to be thinking about that.
Yes. It's joint
So,
conversation,
yeah,
yes.
this is a very, very important conversation. And I think we even talked about it here several months ago. But it's crucial. And the reality about the amount of the budget issue is crucial because it invariably is the same people that do the asking. And it is not the board that is making these asks. It is within the administration. So, and unfortunately, the worst results are frankly instructional. And that's where we're spending significant amounts of money with limited results, at least according to the public and the ways that we're being measured. So this is a very frustrating time. And thankfully, Jen did look at those pre-COVID budget and the post-COVID budget, and these expenses are outrageous. They're not, they can't be explained under normal circumstances. So something's quite wrong there.
You can't find teachers, is that the big driver?
Oh, there's a lot of factors. Well, I don't know right now. The vacancies are saving, apparently have been part of the savings of our budget. And of course you have to answer, well, what about the performance? We might have vacancies that are financially saving us, but what's the performance level of the district? We're really in a very difficult situation, and I think this budget, in my 15 years, this is at least one of the 1 or 3 budgets that is most important, and I don't think the work is nearly done on what we need to be, and much of the decision making is being done too. In part, thank goodness for the partnership between, and it's a working partnership between the superintendent and the treasurer. But indeed, the vast majority of the top decision makers have had to learn what CPS is all about. And this is that's fresh eyes desperately needed, but also causes folks to question. And we're in a difficult time. Very difficult time right now.
Thank you. So Dr. Moffitt asked the question about those contracts that we eliminated and the statistics behind it. And I did find those charts I had created. So I slapped them into a PowerPoint real quick if you want to flip. So this shows you the number of I did it number and dollars. That 38% of the contracts that were eliminated were locally owned. Specifically to your question there. 13 were women owned, small business, and then minority owned. So then if you look at the next slide, shows you the dollars, basically the same, a little shifts there. Next slide shows you the minority or women owned versus not. And so you can see the majority of contracts that were eliminated were not minority or women owned. And you have all those. These do. Okay.
I can't see it.
Okay, and then the next one shows you the dollars. It's the same. There you go, 60% versus 40%. So we're being very mindful. When Mrs. Levens, our director of purchasing, comes and talks about the RFP, maybe she can help update on the supplier diversity data that she's been working on. Any questions on financial stuff?
I wanted to add one little part also into this, and I think this is where audit committee can be really helpful for us going forward is that we are, as historically as a district, we add stuff, we don't subtract. Right? So we typically have added a lot of things and said, well, it's got to be a benefit because at some point it probably was a benefit. We've not historically done this subtraction when it's no longer a benefit or when it's no longer of value as it was at the time. And I think that is one of the things that to Ms. Bolton's point earlier of the role of the audit committee is that there are audits that we are going to do that are going to tell us that certain things that we have done historically that everyone absolutely loves is ineffective or inefficient or should be done a different way. And as we do some of those audits into that school work or into how things operate, into how things function, I think it is the strength of the audit committee to be able to say, you all have tasked us with reviewing, providing that feedback and guiding some of the thought process you should be having as a board and as a district to improving. And that's where we have to then step up to the plate and do so. Because I can tell you right now, this year's budget's bad. Next year's budget's going to be even rougher because we lose all ESSER dollars at the end of this year. And so there are a lot of things that are going to be stuff that frankly just doesn't make sense fiscally and doesn't produce results or doesn't functionally operate the way it should or work the way it should, that I think will come before the audit committee in some form or fashion. I would love it, as Ms. Bolton said, for you all to be able to give us that kind of kick in the butt to say, now fix it and do it right, that we probably need.
So we should apply that KPI thinking to what we do. So not only contracts, but everything we've been doing, because you're right, we've been adding and never subtracting. I think we should add that to the audit plan.
Well, Lauren's looking into it. Yeah, we talked about that.
That's very good.
All right. Any final comments or questions quickly?
I'm sorry, one last thing. Because board member Craig brought up the whole paycheck error stuff, I just wanted to, I feel the obligation to defend the department, that we did do an analysis and that 96% of the errors on a paycheck occur outside the department, outside of the payroll department. Payroll gets all the phone calls and the complaints. I have trouble keeping people in that department. But there is part of this whole education and compliance and escalation routine that we're working on.
I'm going to make one last comment too. And we need this for the audit committee and all of us. We are going to be having to go to the public for more money very, very soon for a number of reasons and causes and whatever. But we have to have our house in order before we ask anybody anything, because they will say no, regardless of our record. Over the past couple of decades, where we've been proud to have, I think, one of the winningest records for levies and new money, old money, whatever. But much of it has to do with facilities, number of schools, results, instructionally, operations, all this other stuff. So this next year, to your point, next year, the following year's budget, it's going to have to see a completely different district. Period. So this is real big time for all of us to really be very dependent, and you be very demanding of us, or we will be in greater trouble.
And that just further underlines the importance of the work that you all are doing and your department is doing. So
get to it. Gotta go work.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Good.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you.